Join James Tambalebi for Ask the Expert.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Expert with me, James Tambalebi. This week's edition will focus on the topic called infectious diseases, with particular reference to viruses. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, infectious diseases are defined as disorders in the body system caused by pathogenic microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, parasites, or fungi. The disease can be spread directly or indirectly from one person to another. But for an expert definition of an infectious disease, I have come to talk to my expert, Professor Alhaji Yunjai, lecturer and scientist at the Department of Biological Sciences for Abbey College and Department of Microbiology at the College of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences, Comas, University of Sierra Leone. Professor Njai is also a research fellow, University of Wisconsin-Madison, USA. Welcome to the program, Prof.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes.
So let's start with an expert definition of infectious diseases.
So basically an infectious disease is one that is caused by a microbial pathogen, and it is a disease that tend to be communicable between one person and the other. So it means that an individual is capable of transferring or infecting another individual. And there is also, so transmittable, and then it also does have a duration of time, wherein sometimes some infectious diseases tend to clear themselves in a week. Sometimes it can be 2 weeks. Some takes much longer period of time. So so infectious diseases are usually very different from the non-communicable diseases, but they can also be a lot more of a disease burden to people because of the fact that they are transmittable between one person and the other.
Okay, so let's look at the types of infectious diseases.
Yes. So there are many types of infectious diseases as there are pathogens. There are many types of microbial pathogens. So you have, the virus family, so the infectious diseases that are caused by viruses, and you have those that are done by bacteria, and you have those that are also done by fungi, also other types of protozoans. So there's so many different types. And in place like Africa or Sierra Leone, I will say blessed, but also maybe unfortunate, but we have the right conditions for a variety of infectious diseases. So, and some, also, require a vector, and some of those vectors exist here. So it requires an agent, so an intermediary agent between us and the infectious agent. So, for instance, like malaria, you need you have the Plasmodium falciparum, or the different types of Plasmodium that causes malaria, but you need the mosquito to kind of be the agent or the vector that transmits the Plasmodium to human beings, from one human being to the other. So we have the right temperatures, the right humidity, the right conditions here in Africa to allow for a lot of microbes. And because it's warm, microbes thrive. And so we have a lot. So even the viruses, you have different type of viruses. You have those that we call zoonotic ones, and we have those infectious diseases that are done, that are human infectious diseases, that are also ones that are, animal-based infectious diseases. And even in plants, you find infectious diseases in plants, which can actually have a big burden on plants, because we as humans rely on plants, we rely on animals. So if you have an infectious agent attacking crops, then we kind of have issues with food security. So infectious diseases are widespread, and you have different types.
So can they transfer from animals to human beings or from plants to human beings and vice versa?
Yes, you can have at least zoonotic diseases. You get them from animals. Animals also tend to get it somewhere from the environment. So viruses tend to go, tend to infect animals, tend to infect us humans. And the viruses can also jump from animals to humans. So, for instance, presently we see a lot of this happening because if you look at the forest and the vegetation around us, we humans are doing a lot of deforestation. We are clearing a lot of vegetation. And because we are clearing a lot of vegetation, you see that a lot of the animals are now getting closer and closer together. Animals that used to be very, very apart, spread apart. So the animals that used to be in the savannah, because we've cleared in the savannah, we clear in the forest. So now all the animals are coming much closer. And so there are different viruses are hopping on to each other. So different animals are transferring their own viruses to other animals, and sometimes we humans get closer to these animals because, again, we are encroaching into their habitats, and then we are also picking on the viruses from these animals. So the infectious diseases, the epidemics now seem to be coming up much faster and faster. If you remember, we just had Ebola, and then we've just had Lassa, and now we have COVID. And so it's the before it used to be, it takes a much longer time before you get an outbreak because it was really spread apart. It took about we had something like between 1951 to actually maybe 2 years ago for us to have monkeypox, in Sierra Leone. So you find that now we are seeing a lot more greater frequency. The time frame is getting shorter and shorter, and because we are getting much closer to animals, and more animals are now getting closer to each other, so the viruses have, they have this ability to hop between animals and hop from animals to humans. So that's a part of the big problem right now.
Okay, let's talk about the deadliest form of infectious diseases. Are all infectious diseases deadly, and if are some that we can live with and as human beings?
So because of the nature of our immune system, the humans, we have an incredibly very powerful immune system. And when I say an immune system, it's the set of molecules or set of substances in our body, cells and tissues in our body that allows us to fight external pathogens. So we have what we call the innate immune system. So the innate is what you are born with, you have that, and every individual has that, and that's like, just some cells, some immune cells that are just there, and they are ready to fight off. And then we have others that we call the antibodies, which are based on a humoral immune system. And the antibodies are very, very important. So your immune system is very important. It allows us to fight off a lot of pathogens. So much of the time, the many, many, many infectious diseases that attack us, our body is able to fight it off. And we see nothing. Sometimes maybe just a minor headache, or maybe a cold, or sometimes you don't even have anything. Maybe it's just a rash or something, because our immune system is very incredible.
Boils also,
yes,
a manifestation.
A manifestation of that. Sometimes you have a lymph node. So, because your immune system has succeeded in killing off, and then you get the lymph node swelling because you have to... some of the dead bacteria or the dead viruses are kind of released in the boils. So those are all part of the ways the immune system fights. But there are sometimes also our bodies are equipped with what we call the major histocompatibility complex, the MHC, which is part of the immune cells. So each and every one of us, human beings, we are fundamentally different from one another. No two human beings are the same. based on our immune system and based on the MHC molecules we have. And the only two people who will have the same MHC will be twins, identical twins, from the same egg. Now, each and every one of us has 6 molecules of this MHC, major histocompatibility complex. We have the MHC1 and the MHC2, which are, 3 molecules each, so they make up 6. But it's incredible, for every human being, we are able to shuffle these 6 molecules and make a quadrillion different subsets of these molecules. Now, it's not 1 million, it's not 1 billion, 1 trillion, a quadrillion. That means that we have quadrillion ways of fighting off different pathogens or different foreign things. So for the most part, we are very successful. The human immune system is very good, very successful in fighting off many, many diseases and many, many things that we are exposed to. Even when you eat food, you will find sometimes infectious agent in your food, like salmonella in eggs that causes typhoid. You can find in milk that is not so good, listeria, so much other stuff that can cause stomach poisoning, food poisoning, and all that stuff. So, but all of this stuff are things that our body can fight off. But once in a while, you have deadly pathogens that are able to evade our immune system. And so that's where the problem arises. And they are able to either find ways to evade our immune system, maybe also suppress our MHC functions, and then cause major disease. And for most part, also, some people tend to be affected by that same pathogen. So some people will die if they get sick from that pathogen. Some people will still survive. And some people will, and that's also part of our evolutionary mechanism. So if you have, for instance, and maybe I'll talk about this later, like for instance, COVID now, and people talk about deadly pathogens in different ways. So immunologists are divided. So some immunologists think if you have a deadly pathogen, just leave it, let it do its work, and some people will die, and some people will survive anyways. And some immunologists think, hey, you know what? Let's create a vaccine to protect everyone and protect those who will have to die from it.
So who are those with a louder voice?
Nowadays, it's more about the vaccines, the people who, tend towards vaccines, because again, there's also a business entity to it, and there is also, so we've essentially now created vaccines for everything. And so some immunologists are actually not sometimes very happy because they feel like some of the vaccines are sort of, it's sort of a rip-off of people because, sometimes you say, okay, well, people will not die anyway. They will still develop their immune system. Why do you need to create a vaccine? So they feel like sometimes pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money out of it.
You're listening to Ask the Expert with James Tamba-Leby.
So now let's come to viruses. You've made so many references to viruses. What are these viruses?
So viruses are basic, they are entirely like a protein molecule, and they are small microorganisms which are very tiny, and the fundamental thing about viruses is that they have this ability to exist to exist in a form that is non-living and be stable for a
What does that mean?
So most of the time, we multicellular organisms like us, we mostly are in the living state, right? So we have this so when I say they exist in the non-living state, that they can actually be in a state where they are not reproducing, but they are just in a stable form outside any other tissues. They just like they can be without all the the functionality of a living organism. So they are not breathing, they are not functioning, they are not metabolizing, they are not doing any of the things that a normal living organism will be doing. So they will just be as any other living, non-living thing, that you find. But and that's why you could crystallize a virus. You could take a virus in that form and make a crystal, and that sort of, it's non-living. It doesn't have any life to it. But they do get their own life. Immediately they encounter a living cell, another living cell. So they have to have their own life in another living cell. So it could be humans, it could be animals or other forms. And immediately that happens, then they are able to take over the machinery of that organism and basically utilize the body, that other organism's machinery and begin to replicate within that organism's machinery. For instance, if you have an Ebola virus in your system, basically what it does is that these are all RNA viruses, as we call them. They come in and take over our own genetic machinery and basically insert their own genome and then begin to replicate and divide. And so they will make 1, 2, they begin to make thousands, millions and millions, so they keep replicating. And they just find different part of your tissues, and then they keep replicating. And that's, for them, it's finding that host where they can survive, where they can keep dividing. And then the next moment is to find another host. So if you have like one that goes human to human, is to find another host again, and then their life continues, and then they find another host, the life continues. So that's essentially how viruses will continue along in their lifespan. And then some basically have adapted so well to us humans that they continue to be part of us now. They no longer are basically like a virus that could come in and then you stop it. Like for instance, we have Ebola. Ebola comes, you stop it, and it's done. We forget about it. Ebola is gone, right? But we have other viruses that have just adapted to our human systems.
They are always part of us.
They are always part of us. So they're always hanging around. They won't kill us. And some will not kill us, but some are still there. Like for instance, now we have things like HIV. HIV is circulating. We haven't been able to eradicate it. So it's just there. It's circulating. And so, if you become a lucky person, then unlucky person, you get it. But it's become a human pathogen. It's no longer a pathogen that was part of the animal world. Now it's a human pathogen. And so many other viruses have learned to just, adapt to humans and become part of our human systems.
You're listening to Ask the Experts with me, James Tambalebi, and my topic is infectious diseases with particular reference to viruses. My expert is Professor Alhaji Yunjai, a lecturer and scientist at the Department of Biological Sciences for Obi College and the Department of Microbiology at the College of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences. Prof, let's move forward. The deadliest viruses on Earth?
Oh, man, I will probably rank something like Ebola as one of the deadliest viruses on Earth. And so there is the Ebolas, which are, Ebola has about, we call them the filoviruses, and there is a variety of them. And among the family, we have over 6 or so different types of Ebola viruses. So you have the Ebola Zaire, which is the more potent one. That's the one that actually attacked us here in 2014 and 2013 here between Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. and it's the one you find presently in Congo, and it's been in that part of East and Central Africa. And then you have another form of the Ebola, which is called the Bundungbuyo, which is more in Uganda. It's been out in Uganda. And then you have, of course, a closely related one is to the Ebola viruses, the Marburg viruses, also very, very lethal. And, of course, closer to those also in that same family of hemorrhagic or viral hemorrhagic fevers, you find the Lassa fever. And then also another one that is, in that same hemorrhagic fever families is the Rift Valley fever, which you find in East Africa a lot more. But actually, we have found the Rift Valley here in Sierra Leone. We actually did a surveillance of in cows around Waterloo and Lungi, and we found in ticks, in cow ticks, the Rift Valley fever virus, which is very similar to the sequence you'll find in East Africa. And the thing with the Rift Valley fever, it also has the same sort of clinical profile like you will find with most other fevers. So it could go from being mild to then doing something like a serious fever, and then at its worst forms it becomes very hemorrhagic, and can actually be very lethal. And you have the Crimean Congo. The Crimean Congo, it's a hemorrhagic fever also, which is also very similar to the Ebola families. They are all very, very deadly viruses. And of course, the influenza. Influenza is actually the one everybody had feared, because influenza kills a lot of people around the world every year.
Is it the one they call the flu?
The flu, yes, the flu. And of course, the Spanish flu in 1918 killed over 50 million people, the pandemic, before this one, yes. And in Sierra Leone, it killed over 100,000 people in Sierra Leone, over 500,000 people in Nigeria in 1918, another 200 and some thousands in South Africa, a lot more around the world, the Spanish flu, which is a great
So can we make the conclusion that most viruses are lethal?
Most actually can be very mild. Many others are lethal. The thing with viruses is their ability to mutate, and they keep mutating. And
what does that mean?
So the ability to change their form, their sequence. So for instance, like the influenza, the flu virus. The flu virus is made up of different segments of genes. So you have one gene, and then you have a break, you have another gene, you have a break, and you have another gene, you have a break. So it makes use of all. So if you have let's say 5 genes with these breaks, what the flu virus is able to do is to then break one portion and then reshuffle itself. So you will go from, say, H1N1 that is not so bad to H5N1 formation. H5N1 becomes pandemic quickly because it's very, very lethal. So that's why flu viruses can be very, very deadly, because they can, within the genome, reshuffle themselves and mutate and change their sequence form. So the coronaviruses tend to be up there too in terms of their lethality, like the SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 1, which came out in 2003, was even more lethal than this one, but it didn't go too far. It stayed in Asia and then came up to Canada.
So this is not the first coronavirus?
No, this is not the first one, yeah. So you had the severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 1, that came out in 2003, killed hundreds of people in Asia, came to Canada, and it was stopped. And then you have the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, which is the MERS coronavirus. It's also out in the last 5 years. It's been in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, most of the Middle East, and then it hit South Korea, killing a lot of people. So these two had come before, before this novel coronavirus, which is the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. So this is SARS-CoV-2, because SARS-CoV-2 is very similar to the SARS-CoV-1 from 2003. So the sequence between them is about 70% similarity. And so for this one, and coronaviruses, they don't seem to mutate very, very fast as the influenza. So at least for now, we think that the COVID-1, even with its widespread global pandemic, is changing its form, but it's not changing it so much to become highly lethal, because some other viruses, if they've traveled this far, they will have changed their forms to a point in which by the time they get here to Sierra Leone or Africa, they are even more potent, more dangerous to humans. But thank God, at least looking at the sequence, the mutations, it's gone over 10, 15 mutations now, but the mutations are not too wide. They are just about maybe 10 base pair changes. So it's not so big. So that's, and this virus is not having problems infecting people. So the virus is not having any challenges infecting many, many, many people. Whenever a virus is not having problems or difficulties infecting people, then it doesn't have a need to mutate more. It doesn't have a need to change itself more, because it's whenever it's challenged, then it has to change its form to kind of infect someone. So for now, this one, it seems like it's infecting everybody easily. It's going all over the world. So it seems like there is no issue for it. So that's the only reason why it's not changing its form. And that doesn't say maybe 5 years from now, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, if we have a second wave, it may be a different one. So we don't know. So that's what we don't know for now.
You're listening to Ask the Expert with James Tamba-Leby.
Dealing with viruses. Against the backdrop of what you've explained, the frequent occurrences now, because of so many factors, how do we deal with viruses as a person, as a community, as governments?
So to deal with viruses involves a lot of preparedness. We have to have a lot of preparedness ahead. That's you have to be able to predict them. So if you are dealing with viruses, you have to be ahead of them, one step ahead of them. So we, in our field, we call it virus hunting. So many of us do a lot of things in our research, are trying to go into the wild. Like I go to, for the last 2 years, I've been going up and down Conakry D, through Tombo, through up to Shenge. I look at migratory birds that are coming from Europe. They come to Africa, and they usually come with flu viruses. And then people can eat some of these birds and don't know that you're exposed to these flu viruses. So there is a lot of flu viruses that come, and we do swabbing and take fecal samples from this and try to kind of do sequencing to understand what types of flu viruses that these birds are carrying. And so that gives us the ability to predict ahead of time and then say this may be potential things. If we are finding something, we are informing government, informing Ministry of Health, informing doctors about the potential of this, that could be on the radar in Sierra Leone. And so other things like Ebola, we've been doing Ebola research here through the University of Sierra Leone and other collaborators here at 34 Military Hospital. We've been doing Ebola surveillance since 2014. So it's not that when Ebola ended, we stopped. We never stopped. We continued. So now we found out new types of Ebola in Sierra Leone. So now we have not just the Zaire that attacked us in 2014. We found out about Bombardier virus. We found out about now a high prevalence of the Thai forest type, which there has only been one outbreak in Ivory Coast, and somebody got sick but didn't die, and it infected a chimpanzee also, some animal. And so, but in Sierra Leone, we see that Many people, if you take their blood sample, they are exposed to Ebola viruses, but they are not getting sick. So we see that there is a level of what we call in seroprevalence, some antibodies to some of these Ebola viruses in the population. It is there. So we don't know why people are not getting sick. So that may be part of some of our core immunities that we have, and which I will talk about later. But all of this work is so important in terms of the surveillance. You have to continually be on top.
So there's nothing to stop it, to stop it.
Nothing to do to stop it. You just have to be ready and be prepared. So when you do this surveillance, this research ahead of time, it gives you time. It buys you time to be able to prepare your government to prepare, your communities to prepare, for you to have good hospital systems, for you to have good lab systems, for you to have good... and when I talk about hospital systems, as we are seeing now, it's not just hospitals to treat normal people. Like when you look at the countries doing right now very well with this epidemic, with the COVID, you look at South Korea, you look at Taiwan, you look at Vietnam and some of these countries. They had the pandemic with SARS when SARS came out in the first one in 2003, and they learned. And what they did was to create clinics that are specialized for epidemics. So like what we had here during the Ebola, if we had developed our systems, then we will create all the holding centers. We will have had all the quarantine centers, so we don't have to be scrambling to where we are sending people for quarantines. Then we will have had all the lab facilities. Then you have in every district, every town in this country should have a very standard laboratory to be able to do all your testing, and you get information. You don't have to take samples all the way to Freetown or maybe outside the country. And then you should be able to then test for at least over 100 or more different types of fevers, such that you can now distinguish between Ebola and influenza and COVID and chikungunya. So we've seen in Sierra Leone, for instance, now, we've seen chikungunya, which is a mosquito-borne fever. We have in Freetown here over 40% prevalence of chikungunya in samples from 34 that we've collected, in samples from Ramsey Lab. Over 2,000 samples, we saw over 700 samples positive for chikungunya in Freetown. And, you see dengue fever in Freetown. We see Zika in Freetown. We see Rift Valley fever here. We see, West Nile virus. So all of these are in the population. So we need to sample for all this and be prepared. And because God knows which one will be next. And that's where you then start to scramble again. So you have to be on top. And this information should inform us, the government, inform community members, and you begin to build all these apparatus, these structures that we build. You don't disband them. You continue to strengthen them. The surveillance, the community engagement, all the things that you do now, you continue to just make it stronger and stronger. Because, as I say, for me, I'm actually, when people are worried about COVID, I'm not worried about COVID, actually. I'm not worried.
I see you relax.
Yes, I'm not worried about COVID. I am worried about much more deadly ones than COVID.
We can go on and on and on, but for this edition, let's hold it there.
Thank you.
And I will engage you again for a subsequent edition. Yes. You've been listening to Ask the Expert with me, James Tambalebi, and we've been talking on the topic infectious diseases with particular reference to viruses. And my expert has been Professor Alhaji Yunjai. He's a lecturer and a scientist at the Department of Biological Sciences for Abbey College and the Department of Microbiology at the College of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences, Commerce, University of Sierra Leone. Professor Njai is also a research fellow, University of Wisconsin, Madison, United States of America. Keep listening.
Tune into Radio Mount Orel, FM 107.3 every Monday after the 8 p.m. news bulletin and on Saturdays after the 7 a.m. news bulletin for Ask the Expert.